On August 10th, the ground under western Colombia let go without warning. In less than a minute, buildings that had stood for decades folded in on themselves like stacked cardboard boxes. 9 days later, on the other side of the planet, Indonesia felt the earth do almost the exact same thing. Japan, Venezuela, Mexico, the Philippines, and even southern Spain have all shaken hard enough to make world headlines this year. This is not just a string of bad luck earthquakes. This is a pattern that has millions of people asking if the planet itself is changing. And once you understand what is really happening under our feet, you are going to look at solid ground a little differently for the rest of your life. Most channels covering this topic either downplay it into nothing or turn it into total doomsday panic, and neither one is actually telling you the truth. I only work from real seismic agency data, real government reports, and real historical records, so you get the accurate picture instead of whatever gets the most panicked comments in the section below. Later in this video, I'm going to show you the exact number scientists use to decide whether earthquake activity is truly rising, and it is not the number most people guess. If you want the calm, honest version of what is happening under our feet, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. Let's start with the basics, because you cannot understand why the ground shakes until you understand what the ground actually is. Most people picture the Earth as one solid ball of rock. It is not. The outer shell of our planet is broken into giant pieces called tectonic plates, and they float on a slow-moving layer of hot rock underneath, kind of like how a few large rugs might be laid out across a hardwood floor, not stitched together, just sitting there, edge to edge. Now here's the part that matters. Those plates are not sitting still. They are always moving, just incredibly slowly, about as fast as your fingernails grow. Where two plates touch, they do not always slide past each other smoothly. Sometimes they catch on each other, the same way two pieces of sandpaper can grip instead of glide when you press them together. When that happens, the plates stop moving at that exact spot, but the rest of the plate behind them keeps pushing forward. Picture pushing a heavy couch across a carpeted floor. If the bottom of the couch catches on the carpet, the couch does not move smoothly. Pressure builds up in your arms and in the couch frame while nothing on the outside looks like it is happening. Then all at once, the couch breaks free and jumps forward in one sudden jolt. That jolt, multiplied by the size of an entire tectonic plate instead of a couch, is an earthquake. The stuck spot finally snaps loose, releases years or even centuries of built-up pressure in a few seconds, and sends shockwaves rattling out in every direction, the same way a sudden jump of that couch would send a shiver through the whole rug underneath it. So earthquakes are not random explosions from nowhere. They are the release of pressure that has been quietly building for a long time, sometimes for hundreds of years, in a spot that finally could not hold on any longer. The size of the jolt usually depends on how long the pressure was allowed to build before something gave way, which is exactly why the spots that stay quiet the longest are often the ones capable of the biggest, most sudden jump when they finally do let go. Keep that couch picture in your head, because it explains almost everything you are about to hear. Now, here is where most people get confused, and where a lot of channels either lie to you or just do not know the real answer. With Colombia, Indonesia, Japan, Venezuela, Mexico, the Philippines, and Spain all rattling in the same few months, it feels obvious that something new and dangerous is happening to our planet. I want you to sit with that feeling for a second because it is a completely reasonable thing to wonder. But here is the twist almost nobody explains properly. The organizations that actually track every earthquake on Earth, agencies like the United States Geological Survey, have been keeping detailed global records since around 1900. And when you look at over a century of that data side by side, this year does not stand alone the way it feels like it does on your phone screen. On a typical year, scientists expect the planet to produce about 16 major earthquakes, meaning roughly 15 quakes in the magnitude 7 range and about one quake of magnitude 8 or stronger. Some years blow right past that number. 1989 only had 6, 1988 only had 7, but 2010 had 23, which is close to 4 times as many as the quietest years on record. The planet has always swung up and down like this, long before smartphones existed to tell us about it within minutes. So the twist is not that the Earth suddenly decided to shake more this year. The twist is that we are living through a normal, expected swing upward on a graph that has always gone up and down, except now every single event gets filmed, uploaded, and pushed to your phone the second it happens. A century ago, a 7.4 earthquake in a remote part of Colombia might have taken days to even reach international newspapers. Today you know about it in Okara or anywhere else on Earth within minutes, with video. That difference in speed and visibility is doing a lot more work in shaping how this year feels than any actual change happening underground. That does not mean this year is fake news or nothing to worry about, because the human cost has been very real, and we are about to get into exactly how real. It just means the story is more interesting and honestly more useful than simple panic. Let's look at the real events, because the numbers on their own tell a powerful story once you understand what they actually mean. On June 7th this year, the Philippines was hit by a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. To put that number in perspective, each whole number on the earthquake scale represents roughly 32 times more released energy than the number below it. So a 7.8 is not just a little stronger than a 6.8, it is dozens of times more powerful, similar to comparing a firecracker to a stick of dynamite. Just over 2 weeks later, on June 24th, Venezuela was struck by two powerful earthquakes within seconds of each other, measuring 7.2 and 7.5. Imagine getting hit by one gut punch, and before you can even react, getting hit by a second one almost as hard. That is what northern Venezuela experienced, and entire neighborhoods were leveled in the process. In July, Mexico recorded a magnitude 7.3 earthquake. Mexico sits on top of several tectonic plates grinding against each other at once, which is part of why the country has such a long, painful history with earthquakes, something we will come back to shortly. Then, on August 10th, the earthquake that likely first put this topic on your radar. A magnitude 7.4 to 7.5 quake struck the Choco region of western Colombia. At the time of this recording, official numbers stand at more than 319 people confirmed dead, over 4,600 injured, and more than 260 still listed as missing. The shaking was strong enough to be felt across western and central Colombia, and even reached into neighboring Ecuador and Panama. To put that region in perspective, that is roughly like an earthquake in one country being clearly felt in two entirely different countries next door, all from a single jolt. Just 5 days after that, on August 15th, Indonesia made headlines again when a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck the Flores region. At least 47 people were killed, thousands were displaced from destroyed homes, and the region has been dealing with a long tail of aftershocks ever since, smaller jolts that continue rattling the same area for weeks after the main event, the way a table keeps wobbling for a few seconds after you bump it hard. Japan was also hit this year by a powerful offshore quake near the Sanriku coast, measured by different agencies at somewhere between 7.4 and 7.7, strong enough to be felt from the northern island of Hokkaido all the way down to Aichi Prefecture, a spread of hundreds of miles from a single earthquake. And in Spain, something a little different has been happening. Instead of one massive jolt, the province of Granada has been going through what scientists call a seismic swarm throughout August, meaning dozens of smaller earthquakes above magnitude 4, one after another, with Spain's National Geographic Institute keeping a close watch on the pattern. 7 major events, 5 different regions of the world, all within a matter of months. When you line them up like that, side by side, it is easy to see why people are asking questions. But here is something that actually calms a lot of that fear once you see it, and it is the kind of detail most channels skip because it does not sound scary enough. Big, deadly earthquakes are not a new invention of this year. They have been part of human history for as long as we have kept written records, and looking back at a few of the biggest ones ever recorded actually helps put 2026 in its proper place. The single strongest earthquake ever measured on our planet struck Valdivia, Chile in 1960 at a staggering magnitude 9.5. Remember, each full number on that scale means roughly 32 times more energy, so a 9.5 is not just a bit stronger than the 7.4 in Colombia, it released somewhere in the ballpark of tens of thousands of times more energy. That single quake, along with the tsunami it triggered, killed an estimated 1,000 to 6,000 people and sent waves crashing all the way across the Pacific Ocean to hit Hawaii and Japan, over 10,000 miles away from where the ground actually broke. Then there is December 2004, when a magnitude 9.1 earthquake ruptured off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, and triggered a tsunami that struck coastlines across 14 different countries. The death toll from that single event is estimated at around 230,000 people, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters ever documented, all set off by a single crack in the ocean floor that lasted only a few minutes. In March 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the coast of Tohoku, Japan, generating a tsunami with waves reaching over 130 feet high in some coastal areas, roughly as tall as a 13-story building rising up out of the ocean. Close to 18,000 people died, and the flooding was severe enough to knock out cooling systems at the Fukushima nuclear plant, triggering a meltdown that is still being cleaned up today, well over a decade later. And going back to 1985, Mexico City was struck by a magnitude 8.0 earthquake from an epicenter over 200 miles away on the coast. Because so much of the city sits on that soft, drained lakebed we talked about earlier, the shaking got amplified instead of settling down, collapsing hundreds of buildings and killing an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 people, even though the actual epicenter was practically a 2-hour drive from the capital. Lay all of that next to this year's events, and a clearer picture forms. Earthquakes at this scale are not new, they are not unprecedented, and they have shaped human history for centuries. What has changed is not the planet, it is how fast the news of each one reaches your pocket. Since we are already talking about history, here's a quick one for you. Before I found the exact USGS numbers I am about to share later in this video, which one of these past disasters did you already know about, and which one is completely new information for you? Comment which ones you knew. It genuinely helps me shape which historical events to dig into on this channel next. I want to know something honestly, so tell me in the comments below. Out of every event I just listed, which one is the first time you personally heard about it? I have a feeling the answer is going to surprise even me once I start reading through the responses. Here is why this matters far beyond the headlines you have already scrolled past. Almost every single one of these earthquake zones sits along something scientists call the Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped chain of fault lines that wraps around the entire edge of the Pacific Ocean, passing directly through Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Mexico, and the western coast of South America, including Colombia. It is not one single crack in the earth. Think of it more like a long, curved seam where several rugs meet edge to edge all the way around an entire ocean. And almost every earthquake we just talked about happens somewhere along that seam. And this is not some empty region on a map. This ring passes directly underneath or beside some of the most heavily populated cities on the entire planet. Tokyo and its surrounding metro area is home to somewhere around 37 million people, making it the largest urban area on Earth, sitting in one of the most seismically active zones anywhere. Jakarta, Indonesia's capital, holds more than 10 million people directly on this same danger belt. Mexico City sits on top of an old drained lake bed, soft ground that can actually shake harder and longer than solid rock nearby during a big quake, similar to how Jell-O wobbles longer than a firm block of wood after you tap the table it is sitting on. Even parts of the United States sit on this same ring, along the entire West Coast, including California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. In fact, during the same stretch of major earthquakes this year, Hawaii also recorded a magnitude 6+ tremor of its own, a reminder that this ring truly does circle the whole ocean, touching American soil too, not just countries that feel distant from where you live. California alone has close to 40 million residents living somewhere within reach of an active fault system, and cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco have entire building codes and school drills built specifically around the assumption that a major quake will happen there again, not if, but when. Alaska, meanwhile, is home to one of the most seismically active zones in the entire country, producing more magnitude 7 earthquakes on average than any other American state, even though it rarely makes national headlines the way a quake in a big city does, simply because fewer people live there to feel it. This is why a cluster of earthquakes happening on the other side of the planet is not just sad news to scroll past. Depending on where you live, you might be sitting closer to the next link in that same chain than you realize. If any part of that hit home for you, this is exactly the kind of channel that is worth sticking around for, because we are going to keep covering the real science behind these events as they unfold, not the exaggerated version. Give this video a like if you are learning something you did not know 5 minutes ago. It genuinely helps this kind of careful, fact-based video reach more people, instead of the panic-driven ones. Now let's go one layer deeper than most videos on this topic ever bother to go, because there is a mechanism connected to all of this that almost nobody talks about, and it directly involves the United States. Off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, running from Northern California up through Oregon and Washington and into British Columbia, sits something called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. A subduction zone is just a fancy term for a spot where one tectonic plate is slowly being pushed underneath another one, like one rug sliding beneath the edge of a second rug instead of just bumping against it. Right now, the plate offshore is locked tight against the plate underneath the coastline, meaning it has not slipped in a very, very long time. The last time this specific stretch of coastline let go in a major way was the year 1700, over 320 years ago. Native oral histories describe a massive nighttime shaking followed by a wave that flooded coastal villages, and Japanese records from the same era document a mysterious tsunami arriving on their shores with no earthquake felt locally, which scientists later connected back to this exact event on the other side of the ocean. That single detail is one of the clearest pieces of evidence in earthquake science, because it means the wave crossed an entire ocean before anyone in Japan even knew why. Since that quiet, sleeping stretch of coastline has been building pressure for over 3 centuries with no major release, scientists studying it estimate it is capable of producing an earthquake in the magnitude 8 to 9 range when it finally does slip, similar in scale to the same category of event we have watched unfold in Japan and Indonesia this year. It is not a question researchers ask if it will happen, only when, which is honestly a strange and unsettling sentence to say about your own backyard if you live anywhere near that coastline. I bring this up not to scare you, but because it connects directly back to everything we have covered so far. The same stuck plate, stored pressure, sudden release pattern that leveled parts of Colombia in August is quietly loading up along the American West Coast too, just on a much, much slower and longer timeline that is harder for any of us to feel or notice day to day. Does knowing that change how you think about earthquakes happening in faraway countries? Drop a comment and let me know, because I read every single one, and I am genuinely curious whether this connects differently for viewers living near the American West Coast versus everywhere else watching. There is one more small detail worth knowing here too. Ground itself is not always as solid as it feels. During strong shaking, loose, water-soaked soil can briefly behave almost like a liquid instead of solid earth, a process scientists call liquefaction. Picture a cup of wet sand at the beach, solid enough to stand on when it is still, but the second you jump on it and vibrate it hard enough, it turns soft and jiggly under your feet. Whole buildings can sink, tilt, or sway on ground that does this during a big enough earthquake, which is part of why the exact type of soil under a city matters just as much as how close that city sits to a fault line. Quick favor before we keep going, since we're only about halfway through everything I want to cover. If you are finding this more useful than the average disaster video on your feed, tapping subscribe now means the next deep dive, whichever region it covers, lands directly in your feed instead of getting buried under everything else you are subscribed to. Now, let's talk honestly about the myths, because this is where I want to earn your trust rather than your fear. A lot of disaster content online leans on Hollywood-style claims to keep you watching, and I am not going to do that here. First myth, the idea that California is going to break off and fall into the ocean. This is physically impossible. Tectonic plates do not float on liquid magma like a raft on water. They sit on a slow-moving, mostly solid layer of hot rock, and California is attached to the North American plate, not floating loose on top of anything. Even in the worst-case earthquake scenario, no chunk of the state detaches and sinks. That claim comes from disaster movies, not from geology. Second myth, the idea that animals can reliably predict earthquakes before they happen. There are old, interesting stories of unusual animal behavior right before a quake, but no scientific study has ever proven animals can consistently sense earthquakes coming with enough reliability to build a warning system around, and the world's leading geological agencies do not use animal behavior as a prediction tool for exactly that reason. Third myth, the idea of earthquake weather, meaning hot, still, muggy days somehow make earthquakes more likely. This one has been studied directly, and researchers have found no meaningful connection between surface weather conditions and earthquake activity, which makes sense once you remember that the actual cause is happening miles underground, in rock, completely shielded from whatever the sky is doing that day. Earthquakes happen just as often on cold, rainy days as they do on hot, sunny ones. Fourth, and probably the biggest myth connected to everything in this video, the idea that the Earth is entering some kind of new, unprecedented era of shaking because of everything happening in the news this year. As we already covered using real agency numbers, this year's activity, while genuinely devastating for the people living through it, still falls within the normal range the planet has swung through many times before, including years with even more major quakes than this one. The tragedy is real. The idea that the planet itself is somehow malfunctioning is not supported by the actual data. I am not telling you any of this to make the situation feel smaller than it is for the families who lost everything in Colombia, Venezuela, or Indonesia this year. I am telling you this because real, calm information is more respectful to those people than turning their tragedy into an exaggerated end-of-the-world story for clicks. So what should you actually do with all of this information, especially if you live somewhere near a fault line yourself? Nothing complicated, and nothing that requires panic buying or living in fear. Start with your own home. Walk through it and picture what would happen if the floor suddenly jolted hard for 30 seconds. Heavy furniture like bookshelves and tall dressers should be secured to the wall with simple anchor straps so they cannot tip over onto anyone. Keep a basic emergency kit somewhere easy to grab, including water, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and copies of important documents, enough to get through a few days without power or easy access to stores. Learn the actual safety move recommended by every major geological agency, which is drop, cover, and hold on. The moment shaking starts, drop to the ground where you are, get under something sturdy like a table if one is nearby, and hold on to it until the shaking fully stops. This is the move that actually protects people, not the old myth about standing in a doorway, which modern building design has mostly made outdated and less safe than simply getting under solid furniture. Talk with your family about a simple plan, like where to meet if you get separated and phone lines are jammed with everyone else trying to call at once. And finally, if you want to know your own personal risk level, most National Geological Survey websites let you type in your address and see exactly which fault lines and hazard zones you actually live near, which turns a vague worry into a clear, useful piece of information you can actually plan around instead of just carrying around in the back of your mind. If you live somewhere earthquakes are common, it is also worth spending 5 minutes finding out whether your area has any kind of early warning system. Several countries, including parts of the United States, Japan, and Mexico, now run systems that can send a phone alert giving people anywhere from a few seconds to a full minute of warning before strong shaking arrives. That might not sound like much, but a few seconds is enough time to drop, get under a table, or step away from a window, and it can genuinely be the difference between walking away fine and getting seriously hurt. None of this requires fear. It just requires being a little bit prepared, the same way you might keep a spare tire in your car without expecting a flat every single day. So let's pull this all the way back together. The ground under all of us is made of massive plates that are always slowly moving, catching, and eventually letting go, the same way a stuck couch suddenly jumps forward once enough pressure builds up behind it. This year, several of those stuck spots happened to let go within a few months of each other, in Colombia, Indonesia, Japan, Venezuela, Mexico, the Philippines, and Spain. And modern technology means every single one of us found out about it almost instantly, which is a huge part of why this year feels so uniquely intense. The actual global data shows this level of activity, while genuinely tragic for the people who live through it, sits within the normal range the planet has swung through many times across the last century, the same way 1960, 2004, and 2011 each had their own devastating stretch long before any of us could watch it unfold live on a screen. What is different is not the Earth. It is our awareness of the Earth, which honestly might be an even more powerful thing to understand, because awareness is the one part of this entire story you actually have some control over. That awareness is really the whole point of this video. You cannot stop a tectonic plate from finally letting go after decades of pressure. Nobody can, not even the best scientists on the planet with the best equipment money can buy. But you can understand why it happens. You can recognize when a headline is designed to scare you instead of inform you, and you can take a few small, calm steps at home that genuinely make a difference if the ground under you ever does start to move. If this video helped you understand what is really happening under our feet, instead of just feeling scared by another headline, tapping that like button genuinely helps other people find this same, calm, honest version of the story, instead of the panic-driven versions flooding other channels right now. If you want to stick around, I am planning to break down the Cascadia subduction zone in a lot more depth in an upcoming video, including exactly what scientists are watching for along that coastline right now, so subscribing and turning on notifications means you will not miss it when it goes up. Before you go, I would genuinely love to know, do you live anywhere near a fault line or an active earthquake zone yourself? And has anything you learned in this video changed how you think about it? Drop your answer in the comments. I read through every single one, and some of the most interesting details in future videos on this channel have actually come directly from stories viewers like you have shared down there. And if you found this useful, there is another video coming soon on this channel digging into exactly what happened underground during the Colombia earthquake specifically, minute by minute, that you will not want to miss.